Welcome all to our live stream tonight. Whether you are watching this live or on replay, most of you will be watching it on replay. Do me a favor, let's get this video started off right. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are brand new joining us. We don't just want Mets fans here, although we love our Mets fans. If you're an MLB fan, you are welcome to join the family. So, folks, the New York Mets, right now we are obviously not in the playoffs. So, I am hoping the New York Mets are taking this time to reevaluate themselves, to prepare for the offseason. Prepare for the offseason in a big way. Obviously, we did things a certain way last year. Didn't work out. Made some horrendous moves. Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea did not work out. The pitching staff was putrid. The team was unfundamental. The coaching staff obviously took the brunt of all of the pain and the suffering. They got fired. But the New York Mets right now, it's just pretty sad if you really think about it. I mean, you saw the title of this video that Steve Cohen is furious, and I wholeheartedly believe that. There's evidence all throughout the Mets nation, and I'm going to go over that detail as well. And folks, it is very, very important to kind of get the temperature of Mr. Steve Cohen, because that, I feel, will give you a good indication of what direction the New York Mets will ultimately go into. Last year, Steve Cohen, he was very pro Juan Soto, despite what David Stearns recommended. I'm pretty sure David Stearns wasn't against it, but he wasn't as pro Juan Soto as Steve Cohen. And this offseason is going to be different. This offseason is going to be different because fiscally, financially, the New York Mets have been a failure. We have been losing money, a lot of money, folks. Since Steve Cohen bought this team, the Mets have almost spent $1.5 billion on payroll. $1.5 billion on payroll, and have very, very, very little to show for it. The most they had to show for it was last year, that miracle run where we got to the NLCS. And folks, look at all the teams this year getting knocked out. The high-paid teams, like the Mets didn't even make it. That was one of the top three payroll teams. The Yankees, the Phillies, and you have a lot of new blood. A lot of teams right now, a lot of new blood right now, and it is really making one think. A lot of the top players, you got Shohei Ohtani, that's a little bit of a different situation. He's more of a unicorn, and they got the right, situation in LA. But, Aaron Judge, one of the best players in the game, he's sitting on his couch right now. You got Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor. So, you got all these superstars, all these teams with all these high expectations, crazy expectations, and it didn't mean anything. It did not mean anything. You have David Stearns, and I gave David Stearns way too much credit. My fault. I'm going to learn from that. David Stearns, I anointed him as the boy genius. I anointed him as a very important figure in the Mets organization that I had confidence in, but I had blind confidence. This year, David Stearns showed you that he has flaws. So as Mets fans, we are hoping that David Stearns is learning from his mistakes, hopefully getting outside opinion so that we can grow and get better. That's the bottom line. You got to do things differently than what you did before and how you failed. You can't do things the same way. All right. Okay. So I mentioned that Steve Cohen is upset. Now, one of the biggest things that kind of blew my mind, I know, you heard Eric Chavez. He was the, hitting coach, and he actually made some comments. We're going to get to that momentarily. But the first comments and first topic we're going to talk about is a topic or a person very, very close to the boss, and that is Alex Cohen. Alex Cohen always had that close personal relationship with the fans. but you could tell by the way she's acting how upset the Cohens are, how frustrated the Cohens are, how disappointed the Cohens are. So for anyone who has not heard, Steve Cohen's wife deactivated her email after the Mets missed the playoffs. So she deactivated her email, and that email was specifically set up to communicate and have a relationship with the fans. So, I'll read you some of the story. Alex Cohen, the wife of Mets owner Steve Cohen, posted a heartfelt message to the fans. She thanked the fans for, being loyal. She said this season didn't end well. It didn't end the way that any of us had hoped, and we feel disappointed because we didn't make the playoffs. Still, our belief in this team remains the same. Most of all, we are deeply grateful to you, grateful to our fans, your passion, your energy, your unwavering support. As we move into the offseason, I'll be stepping away from this work, Instagram, to recharge and refocus. Why am I paying attention to Alex Cohen? Because I feel that Steve Cohen and Alex Cohen, really, they portrayed how, they felt. A lot of things early on, there was a lot of communication between Steve Cohen and the fans. Now you see Alex Cohen pulling away from communicating with the fans. And, I think it really wears on you. Losing wears on you. Alex Cohen will be stepping away from this work to recharge and refocus. She said that she will remain committed to the work that she does for the fans, and she looks forward to reconnecting in the spring. So again, she's going to do this next spring, but this is the first time that it's really been shut down. She's been New York Mets owner. So she also went on to say, I originally created this account to stay connected with you all, but I ended up becoming a platform for some things already, or for some people DMing. Okay, so she goes into other things. All right, but basically she's saying we're going to be back. We're going to come back stronger. We're going to come back hungrier. Cohen really has been that constant presence, but she disappeared. And we have seen Steve Cohen. He has not really made an appearance too much as well. And, I think it's really indicative of how disappointed and how furious Steve Cohen is. In 2023, it was a financial disaster. The Mets lost close to $150 million. Last year, in 2024, the Mets lost over $100 million. And that was in a year where they came 2 games short of the World Series. This year, where we spent a ridiculous amount of money, $800 million on Juan Soto, $75 million to Sean Manaea, 30-something odd million to Frankie Montas. And we spent a hell of a lot of money last offseason to not even sniff the playoffs. Our payroll next year is going to be in a very, I would say, it's a very tricky situation, because we know we got a big decision. Edwin Diaz, Pete Alonso, those are going to be 2 very important decisions. Obviously, those 2 are going to opt out. Edwin Diaz is going to opt out. He's going to test the market. Pete Alonso is going to opt out. He's going to test the market. The insiders from inside the Mets organization have already indicated that signing Pete Alonso is going to be a long shot, folks. Signing Pete Alonso is going to be a long shot. Now, why is that? It's a supply and demand thing. It is a supply and demand thing. So the demand for Pete Alonso this offseason is going to be much, much, much higher than last year. He doesn't have the compensation pick. He's coming off a good year. He's coming off of a very great performance. He's coming off of being very reliable. The guy's played 162 games in the last 2 seasons. He's shown how durable he can be, but that compensation, that draft pick is huge. Monumental thing, and now there are going to be much more teams involved. And again, the contract that was proposed last week by former GM Jim Duquette, he says he believes that contract that Pete Alonso is going to get is going to be around 5 years, $175 million, right? So even if you're someone who is advocating for Pete, is that a contract that you are willing to do? That equates to $35 million a year. Now, you have Lindor on the books. Now, you have Soto on the books. You know, if you don't have Diaz, you're going to have a replacement closer. So that being said, if you get a closer, if you re-sign Alonso, you're over $300 million. You are over $300 million, and you have not made any moves to better your roster. So this is what I'm saying. The New York Mets right now are in a very tough, tedious situation. Steve Cohen obviously cannot be happy. He has lost money hand over fist. Anybody who loses money at the rate Steve Cohen has lost money in the last couple years cannot be happy. Now, the article that I was reading that actually inspired me to do the live stream tonight was I am right. I'm going to read it right here. It was by Mike Puma, and it said, "What spurred the Mets sweeping coaching cuts and where they leave Carlos Mendoza?" So bottom line, why did they fire almost everybody? I mean, that's obvious, but let's dig down deeper. Now, the answer is, and everybody says this, you can't fire all the players. You just can't. You can't fire all the players. Now, I know it doesn't sit well with a lot of Mets fans that Carlos Mendoza, the man who was in charge of that coaching staff, is still in the dugout. The guy who pulled the strings is still in the dugout. The guy who was outmanaged by Terry Francona. The Reds were many games behind the New York Mets, but still found a way to surpass the New York Mets. So they found a way to overcome and, succeed. I mean, obviously they got bounced early on, but the Reds were never that good to begin with. I wasn't surprised that they got bounced early. They were never that good. The Mets were just worse. Okay, so you got Carlos Mendoza still in there. Now I'll tell you what. Think about this. It was David Stearns' full decision and David Stearns' decision alone to bring back Carlos Mendoza. That was David Stearns' decision to bring back Carlos Mendoza. It was David Stearns' decision to basically fire the coaching staff. Now, how are you feeling if you're Steve Cohen? Do you think paying over $350 million, do you think he's happy with Carlos Mendoza's performance? Now, let's just think about this objectively. I believe the only thing that saved Carlos Mendoza is David Stearns. But I believe Steve Cohen is extremely disappointed and underwhelmed with the performance of Carlos Mendoza. And inside his head, you got to be reasoning. Paying $300+ million. There has to be a better guy to manage this team next year. There has to be. And there are better candidates. But David Stearns is sticking to his guns, and he is going to continue to develop Carlos Mendoza. Now, my thing was this season was just way too much of a failure for Carlos Mendoza to earn that next year of being with the club. It was just way too much. So I want to give it to him for that sole reason. But also another reason is I don't envision this guy leading the Mets to the World Series in 2026. I don't think it's feasible. It's possible. Now, we see the competition out there. And if you think about it, the playoffs, it doesn't even include teams like the Braves. It doesn't even include teams. The Braves aren't there. You have some teams that, obviously are good. The Astros aren't there. So there are some top echelon teams that didn't even make the playoffs. And you have a lot of new blood, and it's just too much right now. I think Carlos Mendoza, hopefully this new staff can level things out. But right now, I just don't think he is the guy to take us to the promised land. I really don't. And I think that Steve Cohen really has his thumb on the pulse saying it better work. It better work. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so the depth of cuts in the last week, which included 2 coaches who stepped aside. So last week you had 2 coaches who retired, and then you had a bunch of other coaches fired. So in all, you had 6 coaches who departed. So this is a quote. This is a quote. And this is a quote in the New York Post. This is a quote by, in a story by Mike Puma. And this specifically says, in quotations, "You've got a pissed off owner. So heads were going to roll," a former Mets coach said this week. Which former Mets coach? Is it Eric Chavez? Is it Jeremy Hefner? That is a quote from somebody who just got fired. And justification. Yeah, you're fired. And if you're Jeremy Hefner, if you are Eric Chavez, you know that you didn't lose because of just you or Jeremy Hefner. It was, decisions above you. And, we saw it. And I'm going to allude to it momentarily. When I get to Eric Chavez, he made comments about certain situations and about how he would have done things differently. So I found that interesting as well. Okay, so this all points to Steve Cohen and not to President of Baseball Operations David Stearns or Carlos Mendoza. So the catalyst for all this change, the catalyst for all this shakeup, you might have had Stearns saying, "You're fired," but the emphasis behind this was Mr. Steve Cohen. Mr. Steve Cohen. He needed this. He called for this shakeup. John Gibbons, he resigned. Jeremy Hefner, we all know. Mike Sauerbauer, they are all down and gone. Mendoza will remain in here for his 3rd season as Mets manager. Okay, so one top of saying goodbye, Mendoza became a court. Okay. Okay. All right. So that is really kind of like where we are right now. Where we are, and again, we are right now, the offseason did not start. We are still preparing. We are still learning. We are still in that fact-finding part of the stage of the Mets. Okay. As we get going, let's say goodbye. Not goodbye. Let me say hello. We got Buzz Bass in the room, a master of coins. CeeLo, how you doing? Meanwhile, in Syracuse, I like that. How are you doing as well? A lot of new subscribers, a lot of new comments. I just want to say to everyone, welcome aboard. I'm so happy. I get so motivated to see new comments. We have a lot of members who have been members for years and years. Thank you. I got to continue to say thank you for supporting the channel because you are great. You are wonderful. You make me think. You inspire me. And we have a lot of fun together. So thank you all around. Okay. Like it is. I like Steve Cohen is a great owner. Well, you know what? Steve Cohen, one of the biggest things that Steve Cohen has done in the last 5 years is bring a whole hell of a lot of excitement in Queens. That's what you could give him. And number 2, he has put his money where his mouth is. You have a lot of owners, you have a lot of managers who take control of an organization and they talk. We're going to win championships. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But they don't put their money where their mouth is. Steve Cohen, whether you love him, whether you hate him, this guy, like I said, has invested in players alone over $1.5 billion if you accumulate all the payroll from 2021. If you look at the payroll that he accumulated or that he doled out last offseason, $800 million on Juan Soto, over $100 million to Manaya and Montas, even though that was bad. He doled out almost $1 billion last offseason. Now, again, it didn't work out. So are we going to have the same exact strategy that didn't work? No, we're going to have to reset, retool. And that's, why, okay, well, we're not in the playoffs. We can benefit from that by learning from our mistakes. But again, I 100% agree. I love Steve Cohen as the owner of the Mets. I do. I really do. And, I'm interested to see how he works behind the scenes. Because as we notice right now, besides the tweet, besides the tweet at the end of the year, which he expressed his disappointment, you haven't really heard much from Steve Cohen. You don't see Steve Cohen out there like he was 2 years ago in front of the media, in a press conference. No, it's David Stearns. He is the president of baseball operations. This is his show. You might hear these little tweets here and there, but again, it's interesting to see how Steve Cohen will operate from behind the scenes. And again, we're getting a little inkling into how upset he was. And, we're going to see very soon, we're going to get an indication of how David Stearns will be approaching this offseason. Is he going to go guns a-blazing? I saw some commentary on one of the message boards that, I predict Steve Cohen to just double down. I predict Steve Cohen to go over $400 million. I predict him to sign a Framber Valdez, get into Dylan Cease talks. I expect him to, potentially sign Kyle Tucker. I mean, that's one theory. That's one theory of him going God mode, or, some people may say that's silly, but let's just say, go God mode, and him saying, I got more money than anyone. I'm going to utilize that before the collective bargaining, agreement ends. We also got to remember that this year, not only do we have to learn from our mistakes, but this is the last year. I believe this is the last year under, the collective bargaining agreement. Next year, things are going to change. Years are going to change. So the tax thresholds, the penalties, some people are talking salary cap. Some people are talking, even more luxury tax penalties. So if you're somebody like Steve Cohen and you hear salary cap, maybe you give it a go one last final time. To me, I see Steve Cohen as a guy who is a businessman. I see Steve Cohen as a guy who is trying to be fiscally responsible. The thing is, the thought process was we're spending like we were the last couple of years just so that the farm system develops. But in reality, and this is part of the failure. In reality, how many starting pitchers were developed in the last 5 years? We just saw in the last 5 weeks of the season, one guy that potentially could be a big answer, a big solution, and that is Nolan McLean. Maybe another guy in Brandon Sproat, he could be a nice number 3. But, in the last 5 years, how many of those guys were produced from the farm system? So, again, that is part of the failure. So that is why, season after season, the Mets continue to have to dole out money as opposed to, just having their young kids step in. Daniel, happy Friday. Again, always bringing the positive vibes. I love that. Marcus, hello, everyone. Should the Mets keep Pete Alonso? See, that's going to be the question. I predicted that it's going to be hard or impossible, that I think they're going to go away from that. But again, you ask a very different question. Should the Mets keep Pete Alonso? Now, here's the deal. If you replace, or if you decide to go away from Pete Alonso, we know what's obvious. The obvious is you're going to have a whole hell of a lot of production on the table that Pete Alonso normally has. You're not going to have that. You're not going to have that reliable slugger in the middle of the lineup that you could pencil in for 162 games a year. That is a luxury that I think a lot of us, take for granted. This guy, not only is he there, but he's there 162 games. And, he has been ultra consistent besides a little down year in 2024. So, how would we replace that? Well, I think it's going to be hard for one guy to replace it. If you decide to sign one guy, that's going to be ultra expensive. I think that we are going to have to make sure that we have a balanced attack. We are going to have to make sure that we are not top heavy, that we are balanced in the lineup 1 through 9. That, that is going to give us a better chance of, overcoming, a huge loss like that. Now, that leads to more questions. What are you going to do with Mark Vientos? What are you going to do with Jeff McNeil? What are you going to do with Francisco Alvarez? You want to make sure, Acuna, what are you going to do to make sure and guarantee that your lineup, number 1 through number 9, is consistent throughout the course of the year. So that's what you need. You need a balanced attack throughout 1 through 9. That's going to be part of replacing Pete Alonso. People think of it simply as, oh, you just need one player. No, we have to look at this as a collective effort. You can't just be top heavy. You can't just sign the 1, 2, 3 best players in the league. No, every single person on your team has to be strong, has to be talented, has to be fundamental. And then on the defensive side, whoever you replace him with has to be fundamentally sound. Now, the thing that you saw and I saw and that has been making the rounds in the last couple hours is that Mr. Juan Soto has been taking reps at first base. So how do we feel about that? I felt that, you know what? That's inevitable. Because you have a 26-year-old player who you signed for 15 years, so you know he's going to be here. And you know he has one big, huge problem. His defense is not good. Now, a lot of folks I heard, message me saying, well, it's serviceable defense. He hasn't played that bad. If you look at his advanced numbers, if you look at him, how he, just how he attacks fly balls, how he circles fly balls, how he doesn't even run directly to a lot of fly balls, how he goes back on balls, how he goes in on balls, it's just not very good. So forget about elite, not very good. And you're leaving a lot of runs on the table. In terms of run prevention, that is one of the most obvious answers. Juan Soto coming out of that right field position will ultimately help the New York Mets be fundamentally sound. Now the question is, can he play first base? Well, I look at it like this. I think he probably, and Keith Hernandez would probably hate somebody saying this, but I believe that maybe there's a chance that he could hurt you less playing at first base than in right field. And that might be silly, that might be stupid, because first base is in much more plays. But hey, if he's a guy who can catch a ball, make a scoop, and have that balance at first base, who knows? At least it's going to be something. It's going to be a work in progress. But if the New York Mets have that belief that he hurts you less playing first base than in right field, then, I guess that is a bit of an upgrade defensively. Now, you need to get faster, younger in the outfield. The outfield was a problem. Soto in right field, Nimmo in left field, Mullins in center field. That is probably one of the worst outfield defensively in Major League Baseball. Mullins in center, Nimmo in left, and Soto in right. Horrible. And then games where you had to have Vientos play third, and Lindor, he was struggling, in late August at short, and McNeil was losing range at second base, and, Alvarez was injured behind the plate. I mean, defensively, it was a bit of a joke. And, throughout, the playoff run, different guys. Every day you featured a different era by a different player. If Beatty, everything needed to go right. It went wrong. Bottom line is we need to be fundamental sound. And if you play the game in a right way and you play it fundamentally sound, we're going to make a huge difference. Joe, yeah, I mean, honestly, you're going to represent a large majority of the fan base, and I fully understand that. We need Alonso, but you know what? If we don't get Alonso, I'm going to hold Stearns responsible for everything. Stearns has been here for 2 years. Stearns has a lot of proving to us that he can be a competent to good president, and he's general manager. But this year, bottom line, Stearns was bad. Stearns wasn't even competent. Stearns was bad. So Stearns has to prove to us, the fan base, that he can be competent. So again, Alonso is going to be the big question. Edwin Diaz is going to be the big question. And this is going to be the scary thing for Mets fans. And I don't even want to say it. But, there are a couple of nightmare situations. Like, you don't want to see Alonso. You don't want to see Alonso in the Bronx. You don't want to see Edwin Diaz in the Bronx. Those are nightmare situations, folks. So, those are the things that scare me, or Philly or the Braves. That's the thing. I mean, if God forbid, you got to lose an Edwin Diaz. It would be nice to see him go to a team that has no rivalry, no history with us. Although obviously you want to keep him. Obviously you want to keep him, because if you lose an Edwin Diaz, who do you really have in the bullpen? And now we have, Will, you have the other perspective by Pete. Time to move on from Pete. So, we're going to have that. We're going to have, that two sides of every coin. I'm not going to say most, but half of the fan base by Pete, and half of the fan base. But I would say even the part of the fan base, and I'm pretty sure, Will, you would agree, even the part of the fan base that says it's time to move on, I'm pretty sure every fan, New York Mets fan, appreciates and still, loves Pete for what he did in New York. But, some people, he's 31 years old, he's getting older, he's going to eventually decline. His defensive, his outs above replacement, or whatever, the defensive metrics, or I forget the exact stat, but his defensive metrics were just bad. TP Joseph, hopefully you're doing well. Marlin fan, you got to. I'm not going to say your team is better than the Mets, but honestly, the Marlins really gave the Mets a run for their money this year, and really showed the world how good and dynamic that team could be. So TP, enjoy your team. I like watching the Marlins. I live in Florida. I watch a lot of Marlins games, and they are an exciting bunch. I got to say that. Okay. And here's another good point. If we're not winning with Pete's numbers, it's time to move on. I mean, and that's a pretty good perspective. You literally just had the first 7 years of Pete's career. That is when he's 24 to age 31. Should be the prime of his career. If he can't win when he's supposedly at his career heights, are you going to win when he's diminishing? Are you going to win when he's getting slower, when his range is getting less? I mean, we already know the biggest problem with Pete is he can't hit the pitcher when he's covering first base. That is so damn frustrating. And I expressed this during the last weekend when Nolan McLean was pitching, our ace or future ace, and you have Pete Alonso trying to hit Nolan McLean as he's running to first base, and he hits Nolan McLean, I believe it was over his head and behind McLean. So McLean had a jump, and God forbid McLean comes down limp, or any pitcher for that matter. I mean, it is very dangerous for these first basemen who cannot hit the pitcher, who cannot make that simple throw. So, whatever Pete does, got to get better. Now, if Pete and the Mets somehow come to an agreement, and I only feel that's going to be on the table if a guy like Scott Boras screws up like he did last year. Because this year, I think if he attacks the market, and, I think there's going to be a lot of teams throwing money at Pete Alonso early. But if Scott Boras and Pete Alonso say, hey, you know what? We're going to sit back. We're not going to take those offers, and then those teams that are making the offers, hey, they're going to sign other players, and they're going to use that money. And then the money would definitely, will dwindle down like it did last year. I think I have to surmise that Pete Alonso and Scott Boras have learned from past mistakes, but that's the only way I could see the Mets getting Pete Alonso, because they're going to want to pay their price. And if that's the case, you got to talk with Pete about playing, half the time. You're going to be, let's say you sign him for 4 years, age 31, 32, 33, 34. Guy's probably going to have to pay DH a good portion of the time. So those conversations, if you go down that road, are going to have to happen. And Buzz, trade Vientos, trade McNeil. That's going to be topics for discussion. But it does kind of stink, because I graded Stearns a D- this year. I gave him a D-. Probably should have given him an F. I gave him a D-. But part of the thing that he did or did not do is Stearns had zero foresight. Zero foresight. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is David Stearns, when he made trades, he traded many prospects at their all-time low, value lows. He traded Blade Tidwell when his value was at his lowest. He traded Drew Gilbert when his value was at its lowest. Now you hear, oh, let's trade Kodai Senga. Oh, let's trade Shomanaya. Let's trade Mark Vientos. All those guys are right now at their lowest value. You know, Mark Vientos, when I say having foresight, well, it would have been having great foresight if you would have traded Mark Vientos off of last year's performance. And Garrett Crochet, and I mentioned this, a couple of times, I said Garrett Crochet, that was on the table. And everybody said, well, we couldn't get him because the Chicago White Sox, they wanted Jet Williams, they wanted Brandon Sproat, and they wanted other players. That's just too much. Well, what we do know from the Chicago White Sox is that they liked a couple of our players. They liked Mark Vientos. How do we know that? Well, they asked for him in the Luis Robert trade, but the Mets weren't willing to do that at that time. So, hey, well, if David Stearns had a little foresight and he said, okay, you know what? Mark's coming off a great year. Let's put Mark in a package for Garrett Crochet. Maybe you package him with Brandon Sproat and another player. You get that done. And in reality, Brandon Sproat and Garrett Crochet are virtually the same age. I believe they're about a year and a half, 2 years difference. So Garrett Crochet is a huge upgrade over Brandon Sproat. I don't think as good as Brandon Sproat could be, I don't think he has the ability to be a Garrett Crochet. And then you capitalize on Mark Vientos' career year, and you get your ace for the next 7-8 years. But again, we didn't do that. The trades we made were desperation trade. So again, we have to do much, much better in anticipating. Now, as I read these comments, it just gets me like really frustrated because it kind of just shows me again where mistakes were made. Jose, Siri, McNeil, Marte, Mauricio, Mendoza, out of here, please. Besides McNeil, Marte, you have Siri and Mendoza. Those are two David Stearns guys, but it's a lot of indecision and a lot of bad decisions. Yes, Siri is gone. Good point. Zig, good point. Another good point. Cohen is learning. You can't just throw money at a team. Well, this is why, you got to believe he knew that because he tried that in the first couple of years with Epler and that regime. Didn't work. 2023 was one of the biggest disasters in Mets history. So Stearns learned that early on. So what does he do? Well, he was wanted and he was trying to, recruit and get David Stearns for years and years. Finally gets his guy. And he gets this guy that he believes can be fiscally responsible, and is a baseball genius, has foresight, has that, pitching lab, who brings all these different attributes to the table where you don't have to spend a lot of money. But, we've seen him invest in many of the wrong and incorrect players. No one will take Nimmo's contract. Well, let's look at Nimmo's contract. Brandon Nimmo, I think he's got 5 years left on the contract. So Brandon Nimmo, he is going into his age 33 seasons. He's going to be 33 years old. And whether the defensive metrics or the advanced defensive metrics show you, because I think the defensive metrics, when I looked at it, it didn't look that bad. But when you saw him, the eye test, when you watch Brandon Nimmo go after, chase balls in left field, you could see, obviously, diminished skills in a big way. He misplayed so many balls in left field, especially in September, and that really hurt the club. And he already has that bad arm. Okay, so he has 5 years left. He's going to be a free agent in 2031 when he is 38 years old. So that 5 years, you're paying him $20.5 million, so almost $21 million. So any team that takes him on is going to be taking on $100 million. So that's not going to happen. So if you're Steve Cohen and you're the New York Mets, if you want to get rid of him. Now, the thing with Brandon Nimmo is he is a clubhouse favorite. He is a fan favorite. He is a favorite of Steve Cohen. He's a very likable guy. He has also been good offensively. But the problem is you have all these guys that struggle defensively. And these guys that struggle defensively are signed long-term. Juan Soto, signed long-term. That's why I think Pete Alonso, you can't sign him long-term. You can't have Pete Alonso long-term, bad defender. You can't have Juan Soto long-term, bad defender. Brandon Nimmo, long-term, bad defender. Mark Vientos, you still got him for 4 more years, bad defender. Too many guys on this nine-man team, going to be a starting lineup. Just too many of those guys just have bad defensive skills. So I would expect a guy like Brandon Nimmo, even though his offensive numbers are good, 25.92, I would heavily explore trading him. And trading him quick. Because the only thing that's keeping his value above float is that damn bat. Now, once that damn back goes, let's just say his back, tightens up and his knee issues get worse. And next year, instead of 25.92, and he's got 10 home runs and 30 RBIs, and he's making $20 million a year, there is zero chance of trading him. Now, if you're David Stearns and you have a little foresight, you have the ability to trade him. Because he's got some value. But I feel the Mets just wait until the value is sucked out of a player, and then they're just absolutely screwed. They either have to release him, or, if they trade him, with 2 or 3 other prospects, and they get very little back. Like, again, this trade deadline was a huge failure. Huge failure. Forget about the fact, one of the biggest things that I saw that stood out is none of the guys you traded for had any contracts that went past 2025. You didn't get any guys that, any of those pitchers that you gave away talent, you could get in 2026, 2027. Not that you're like, oh, I wish I had Ryan Helsley. Oh, I wish I had Tyler Rogers. Oh, I wish I had Gregory Soto. You saw those guys fail, so it's not, that upsetting now. But at the trade deadline, I'm like, okay, we're giving up a lot. I know it's worth it if we make the playoffs. But I see Philly, making a trade for Duran, and I see all the Yankees making a trade for the Pirates closer, and those guys got more than a half a season, and the trades look pretty comparable. In fact, I thought the Mets gave up, a little more in the Giants trade, but again, the value that we got back just wasn't that much. And again, if we would have made the playoffs, if we would have made the World Series, I feel David Stearns would have said, okay, if we win the World Series, it's all justifiable. But forget about that. We didn't even make the playoffs. So, again, huge failure. No one will take Nimmo's contract. Interesting. I think if you pay a good portion of it, I think that bat is the only thing that is attractive right now. Maybe a team that has an open DH. Think about that. A team that has an open DH spot. The thing that's confusing about the Mets is we have so many guys right now that you like the plug. Alvarez might play DH. He's still coming back from an injury. Vientos might play DH. Juan Soto might play DH. You signed Pete Alonso. He might play DH. So that's why the DH option does not really work with the New York Mets. It's just so cluttered up. But another team, Brandon Nimmo, who, has had a good eye in the past, has shown good power as of late, a good clubhouse guy. I think if Steve Cohen pays a part of that contract, I think you could get some value back. I really do. Good. Another great point, Will. Most of the coaches weren't handpicked by Carlos Mendoza. He'll have more say in this group of coaches. Yeah, and I think, when it happened last week, that was a very important point I personally missed it. I missed it in my initial video, but that's a great point. It's really hard to hold Carlos Mendoza accountable when none of his lieutenants were actually picked by him. At least a majority of the lieutenants. You had Jeremy Hefner. He was here since 2020. He was here when Brody Van Wagenen was here. He was supposed to be Carlos Beltran's, a pitching coach. So he was here well long ago. Eric Chavez was here 3 years ago. So a lot of that coaching staff was already in here when Carlos Mendoza. So Carlos Mendoza just basically had to take it. What's up, Stan? Stan the man. Fellow Met fan. We love Stan. Because I want to go through a lot of the comments, so that's what I'm doing right now. They must be getting back to developing pitching. They used to always be pitching first organization. Well, that's the thing that David Stearns did touch on in his press conference. He did touch on that at many times late in the season, that the Mets, if you look at their top 30 prospects, besides the Nolan McLeans, besides the Brandon Sproats, the Mets have a slew of pitching prospects on the way. So, right off the bat, out of the top 30, you got Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat. And then the next pitcher, you have Will Watson at number 11, Jack Wenninger at number 13, Jonathan Santucci at number 14, Jonathan Pintaro at number 17. You have Dylan Ross. We saw him late in the season. That was kind of silly, but you have him at number 20. That guy's a fireballer. He can hit 101 at the gun. You have Ryan Lambert at number 22, Zach Thornton at number 23, RJ Gordon at 25, Douglas Orellana at 26, Peter Cusseau at 27, and Camden Lohman at number 30. All those guys I just named are in the top 30, and they all pitchers. And David Stearns, the idea is to continue to develop these guys so that, Nolan McLean, Brandon Sproat, let's say those guys get hurt, they're tired. You need to get to the next wave of pitching prospects. You're always going to have the next wave of pitching prospects ready and raring to go. This year, like I said, the New York Mets, we're desperate. I would say this is the first wave under David Stearns. Last year, you didn't see it because that was David Stearns' first year. So this was the first wave of pitchers. First wave, you have Brandon Sproat, you had Jonah Tong, and you had Nolan McLean. What is going to be the next wave? The next wave, we should be able to see that in the beginning of next year. But again, that's going to be interesting because he says that we have to develop our pitchers at a very furious pace. What's up, Sanders? I want the Mets to sign Cody Bellinger, Kyle Schwarber, and Ranger Suarez. Okay, that's interesting. So in this scenario, are you signing Edwin Diaz? I got to assume that if you're going to go invest like that, if you're going to get a slugger like Schwarber, if you're going to get a guy in Cody Bellinger, Ranger Suarez, you got to have a closer. So if you're going to give $20 million to Edwin Diaz or another top echelon closer, you have about your payroll will be at about $270 million. Now, Cody Bellinger, and I saw this on, I think it was Sport Track or whatever. They said that Cody Bellinger, and he's a client of Scott Boras, is going to be looking for a contract around 6 years, $180 million, right? So that is the projected contract. 6 years, $180 million. So that projects to around $30 million a year. So if you give him $30 million, you're at $300 million. Kyle Schwarber, I gotta imagine coming off of 56 homers. I know he's older, but I could see him getting almost like an Alex Bregman type of contract. That means he's going to get maybe a short-term, maybe 3-year deal at a high AAV, 3-year, $90 million, 3-year, $90 million. So, would you do that? 33-year-old Schwarber, 34, 35. So, you're going to just be paying him for a DH. So that gets the payroll up to 330. And then you got Ranger Suarez. Ranger Suarez has been, he's a very good, reliable arm for Philly. You gotta figure he would be looking for Sean Manaea money, around Sean Manaea in that $20 to $25 million range. So, doing those type of roster moves, that takes you up payroll about $355 to $360 million. So is that how you want to build a team? Now, even though we're going to make those additions, you could still save money by trading a Nimmo away. You could still maybe trade, you could do other things. You could do other things if you want to get the payroll down. But if you keep everybody, if you keep Diaz and you make those 3 additions, you're at 355 and expectations will still be through the roof. It's not bad. I like Cody Bellinger. I really do. It gives you that, you want runs prevention. Well, Cody Bellinger, he's a Gold Glove Award winner a couple years ago. He's showing in the last couple years he's really adaptable at the plate. He's been a really dynamic presence. I like him on the field. I like him on the clubhouse. I love the fact you could put him center field, first base, left field, right field. It gives you that elasticity. It gives you that flexibility. If somebody gets hurt, it gives you that insurance. So Cody Bellinger has that value. I like that move. Kyle Schwarber is very, very interesting. Years ago, he was looked at as, a 3-outcome player: home run, walk, strikeout. Kyle Schwarber has really improved himself as a hitter in the last couple of years. People saying, well, he hits in a bandbox in Philly, but a lot of his home runs, in fact, you know what? Let me disprove that, because I can go to Baseball Savant and it'll tell me if he was a New York Met, like if he hit in Citi Field, how many home runs he would have had. So let me tell you how many home runs he would have had, even if he wasn't in Philly. And let me show you this as well. If you look at his... All right, so this is Mr. Kyle Schwarber. So Kyle Schwarber, his Baseball Savant is pretty nice. I mean, obviously he had a great season. He might come in second place, third place in the MVP. So he had a great year nonetheless. His expected WOBA, 98th percentile, slug 99, expected exit velocity 98, barrel percentage 99, hard hit percentage 100. So this is what I want to show people who think, oh, if he just hit like that because he played in the bandbox. No, he hit the ball, and he hit the ball hard. His bat speed, 98th percentile. So even if you think, oh, he's getting older, well, he has elite bat speed. Chase rate, and this is what I like about him. He's a guy that does not chase. He is in the 90th percentile. And most of all, he's got a very patient eye. You put him in the lineup already with Juan Soto, already with one of the most elite eyes in all of baseball. Now you add another guy with that type of attribute. So if we continue to scroll down here, and I apologize if you can't see. All right, so he hit 58 home runs this year, and it tells you in each ballpark, like if he hit the ball the same amount of distance, what would it equate to? And it's pretty interesting. So he hit 58 home runs. If he played in Baltimore, it would have been 52. If he played in Boston, 44. Let's go. So the lowest is 44. Oh, if he played in the A's, he's got 60. So it ranges. So the highest you see is 60. The lowest you see is 44. So, I mean, that's a bit. Actually, I'm sorry. Kansas City, if he would have played in Kansas City, it's 39. So, there is a legit argument to that. If he played in other stadiums, he would have a drastically different home run total. But the bottom line is that's why I want to see is What are his contact statistics? How is he hitting the ball? What's his eye? He's got based on ball 97 percentile, slug 99, hard hit percentage 100%. So it's not like he's just a factor of luck. Now, if you look at the spray chart, let's look up here. Look at the spray chart. He is a pull hitter. He is a dead pull hitter. Now look at everything. Majority of his home runs went to right field. You see it up here. Notorious pull hitter. And even most of his hits are skewed to right field. So, it's all very interesting stuff. And it all goes into, what type of team you want to have. How is he going to fit in? But I think he's a great clubhouse guy. He's a great team guy. But again, this is something the Mets have to consider, or any team would have to consider when they're going to pose that type of offer to Kyle Schwarber. Very interesting. Good question. Got to get an iced tea break. Yeah, as soon as the offseason starts, stay tuned. We're going to be doing more regular live stream. During the playoffs, it's a little rough right now. Like, not much happening, just more or less speculation. And thank you so much, CeeLo, for saying it. If everyone, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. So many different ways. It really does help. A lot of our subscribers watch a ton of content. I mean, watch a lot of the videos. So I really do appreciate that. But just so it gets to new subscribers, hitting that like button is immensely important. And again, I thank everybody. I know there's a lot of new folks in here. So again, thank you to all of you. I really do appreciate you taking the time and being here. It means a lot. Okay. Oh, wow. This is Zig. You were the same guy I was talking to the other day about always wanting Yankee players. That's why we fail. I think that was you. I mean, only one. And my response, it was, well, I only want players that I think are going to help my team. So I don't care who they come from. They come from the Yankees. They come from the Phillies. They come from the Braves. In fact, hey, if they come from my rival, that actually gives me more of an incentive to take that player. But the fact of the reality is the Mets haven't really went after a lot of Yankees. Besides Juan Soto, where is the list of Yankees that the Mets have pursued in the last couple of years? I wanted the Mets to move heaven and earth for Aaron Judge. I wanted that. The Mets didn't do it. And I think, that's, pretty value contract. You give Soto $800 million. You gave Judge $360 million. I know it's a lot less years, but again, I don't see the huge list of Yankees that the Mets are pursuing. I just don't see it. Mullins sucks. I mean, it's hard to dispute that. The guy played horrible. Oh, I forgot Holmes. You're right. I forgot Holmes. So I bet Holmes gets worse next year too. Too many innings pitched. It's so funny. The worst or least tradable players on the Mets, that have the least trade value, and this is so funny. Not funny. It's sad. Are Sean Manaea, Frankie Montas, and even Clay Holmes. In terms of baseball trade values, Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas, I mean, their value is negative. I believe negative 30. They have zero value. Clay Holmes, I believe, is just a little negative value, but it's just so sad that all these pitchers were acquired by David Stearns in the same offseason. Marcus, so dumb. The question is, can Soto be like Bryce Harper? I would have to ask in what way? What I do know about Soto is he is a world champion. he is a world champion. Bryce Harper's not. I know Bryce Harper has MVPs. Bryce Harper has been versatile. Do you mean that he moved over to first base? It's any player can grow, develop throughout their career. Juan Soto obviously has achieved things that not many players have done. So if there's anybody who can adapt, if there's anybody that can grow, it's these all-time legendary players. I think people sell players like Juan Soto short. They really do. But Juan Soto didn't become as great as he is because he has got a bad work ethic. He didn't become an all-time, player because, he doesn't change. He doesn't adapt. He doesn't listen. This is his first year as a New York Met. I expect things to get better. Were there chemistry issues this year? Could have been. It really could have been. You hear that word thrown around all year long, but really, how do you define it? How do you really define? One person may view a certain situation as being, because of bad chemistry. Another person may say, that's not because of bad chemistry. Helsley, didn't do his job and this and that. So again, this is all based on people's perspective. And so that's why it's really hard to put your finger on that. What's up, Scott Soto? Yeah, it was only 26 years old. The guy's still growing. We saw last year another component of his game unleashed, 38 stolen bases. Next year, the guy could be would we? Okay, it looks like Juan Soto stole bases at an elite clip at the end of the year, right? So would you be surprised if Juan Soto, hit 50 home runs, if he stole close to 50 bases? I mean, Juan Soto, I think, wants to have good numbers. I think he wants to be a legendary player. I think that inspires him. Some people call that as being selfish, but, according to Eric Chavez, who was, he spoke to the guys on Foul Territory, Eric Chavez had a similar mentality to me. Eric Chavez said Juan Soto took way too many pitches, and he wanted Juan Soto to be put as the leadoff hitter. He thought that would shake things up. He thought that would be good to set the table. But Carlos Mendoza, David Stearns, they did not really kind of see eye to eye. And, it's comical. Not comical, but it's kind of interesting that, you hear all these things right now. Chavez was fired, but Chavez is trying to tell you, hey, it's really not my fault. I was trying to do different things. I had different ideas. They weren't listening to me on everything. I didn't have the ultimate say. Him saying that he suggested Juan Soto be the leadoff man and it just didn't happen, and that being the thing he suggested, kind of just shows you how little control he actually had. You figure he's the hitting coach. Would he have some input on the lineup? I know the manager would have the final say, but, I found that interesting. All right, folks. So I wanted to do an hour live stream tonight. So we've kind of reached our goal for tonight. So if you can hit that like button and subscribe. Again, I'm going to set times. So set your notifications so you know when the live streams are. Monday is a very big night. Monday, we're going to touch base. I think it's going to 8 o'clock is going to be a good time. Maybe 9 o'clock. Maybe 10 o'clock, but around 8 to 10, we're going to touch base on Monday, and I'm going to tell you the schedule. So stay tuned. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, but definitely set the notifications, hit that bell so you know when we go live. We're going to be dropping some videos too in the meantime, but I want to continue to thank everybody. If I didn't get your comment, I really apologize. I'm looking right now. Steven, I didn't get to your comment. Meanwhile, in Syracuse, Scott, Zig, Courtney, this thing kind of moves really fast. It's like really, really kind of tough. But again, thank you so much, Stefan. I mean, I think you're from, you mentioned in 3 o'clock in the morning, you're from Amsterdam. That is great. I really appreciate that. Mets fans in Amsterdam are the best. Carlos Mullins was the biggest mistake. Oh man, a lot of not so great things about Mullins, but I did like Mullins as a person when he got here, but it just didn't work out. It really did not work out. All right, folks. So we're going to get going for tonight. Thank you, as always, everyone. You all the best. I have so much fun doing this with you, and I love doing it. Thank you. Have a great night. Enjoy. If something happens, obviously we pop on, but I don't expect much during the postseason. After the postseason, it's going to be hot and heavy, and I expect a lot of fun. A lot of fun. The Pete Alonso saga, that's going to begin immediately. The rumors about guys like Kyle Schwarber, Bellinger, Nolan Arenado. If you're interested, Nolan Arenado, I did not really speak about. I don't think the interest is that high in Nolan Arenado. I spoke about him in my video yesterday. If you want to check that out. I'm not a big advocate about Nolan at all because I believe he is a big, diminished, washed up offensive player. But if you can get him in the right situation where you don't pay any extra money and where you get him as specifically as a bench player or a defensive replacement, hey, he's a 10-time All-Star, a 6-time Platinum Gold Glove. No, he's a 8-time All-Star, 10-time Gold Glove. The guy's got great credentials. For the potential Hall of Famer. If you don't got to pay him, if you could shed some salary, and then if you put him in the right role, all right, you know what? Maybe. But again, I go over that scenario in the video, so definitely check that out. All right, folks. Again, have a great night. Thank you. Let's go, Mets.